Imagine you're trying to build like a global high-speed rail network,
Okay, I'm with you.
but the trains are already hurtling forward at 300 miles an hour.
And no one has even agreed on the width of the tracks yet.
Exactly. And like half the world hasn't even been given the raw steel to build their own stations.
Right, they're just watching the trains fly by.
Yeah. And that kind of high stakes midair construction is, well, it's exactly what's happening right now with global AI governance.
It really is.
So we are tackling a mission today that affects quite literally every person listening. We are decoding how the international rules for artificial intelligence are being written in real time.
Right now.
And specifically, how regions like Africa are fighting to be the architects of this future rather than just, subjects of it.
It is a monumental shift. I mean, we are finally moving past the theoretical, philosophical debates about AI and getting into the physical, geopolitical reality of how a society actually governs a technology that moves faster than the law itself.
Yeah. And to help us navigate this, we have two incredible sources on the table today for this deep dive.
Two really revealing documents.
Yeah. The first is this insider, highly strategic report prepared by Dr. Sally Jingwa for CAISD, that's the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Sustainable Development.
Right.
She provides direct, on-the-ground feedback from the inaugural United Nations Global Dialogue on AI Governance, which just took place in Geneva in July 2026.
And it's such a rare look behind the curtain of global summitry. It really shows us the tension between what diplomats say on a stage and the actual messy mechanics of trying to regulate this technology back home.
It's totally different in practice. And we also have a razor-sharp analytical article that takes Dr. Jingwa's report and explores what this UN dialogue signals for Africa's immediate policy choices on the ground.
Yes.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because AI governance is clearly no longer this niche tech issue relegated to IT departments in the basement.
Oh, absolutely not.
We are talking about fundamental geopolitics, human rights, and, frankly, the core of future economic development.
What's fascinating here is that our journey today is going to take us from the high-level diplomatic summitry in Geneva straight into the messy, real-world consequences of policy drafting.
Yeah, where the rubber hits the road.
Exactly. We are going to look at the underlying mechanics of technological power and show you exactly why having a seat at the table requires massive foundational infrastructure, not just, a plane ticket to a UN summit.
So let's set the scene first. Take yourself to the Palexpo in Geneva, July 6th and 7th, 2026. This is happening right alongside the AI for Good Global Summit.
It was a huge event.
Massive. And for the very first time, the entire UN membership is gathered specifically to deal with AI governance. You've got member states, UN entities, scientists, civil society, all in one massive room trying to figure out how to put guardrails on this thing.
And the tone was set immediately by Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't a celebratory victory lap for human innovation, which you might expect at a tech summit. He delivered this stark warning, basically stating that society is currently the subject of an uncontrolled experiment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We have a technology advancing rapidly without a coherent global plan or, frankly, informed public consent.
When the Secretary General calls it an uncontrolled experiment, that feels like a massive red flag.
It's huge.
But let's break down the mechanics of why it's uncontrolled. Because it's not just that the AI models are getting smarter, right? It's the speed of deployment versus the speed of bureaucracy.
That is the core friction right there.
Wow.
Because traditional governance works on a multi-year cycle. You identify a problem, you draft a bill, you debate it, you pass a law.
And set up a regulatory body, which takes forever.
Exactly. But with artificial intelligence, by the time you finish drafting a policy to regulate, say, a specific generative model, 3 new generations of that model have already been released.
Right.
And they've fundamentally altered the economy in ways your draft policy doesn't even address anymore.
Which feeds directly into the central thesis of Dr. Jingwa's feedback report for CAISD, because she makes this really strong argument that inclusion in AI governance cannot just be a symbolic courtesy.
No, not at all.
It is a strict operational governance requirement.
Yeah, her argument rests on a very practical reality. The countries that are excluded from designing AI standards and the evaluation metrics for those standards are the ones most exposed to its downstream harms.
Which makes sense. So let's look at the mechanism of how this actually works. Say a tech monopoly in Silicon Valley trains a massive AI system on data optimized for a Western context.
Right, like American legal codes, Western administrative structures, English language nuances.
Exactly. And then that system is deployed in an African municipal context as, like, a public administration tool. It will fail.
Completely, because the underlying logic of the tool doesn't match the reality of the society that's actually using it.
Yeah.
And the failures, whether they result in biased algorithmic hiring or faulty public service bots or even child protection blind spots, they fall disproportionately on the populations that had zero say in the initial design.
Because they weren't at the table.
Right. The governance frameworks dictate what data is considered safe and ethical. If African nations aren't writing those definitions, their specific cultural and structural realities are simply rendered invisible by the technology.
I see the logic, but that brings us to a massive practical hurdle. Because at this same UN dialogue, the Independent International Scientific Panel on AI brought up what they call the governance evidence dilemma.
Ah, yes.
And this seems like an impossible trap for developing nations.
It is a profound philosophical and practical challenge, honestly. To make responsible, effective rules, any government needs solid scientific evidence of how a technology impacts its society.
Right, you need data.
You need peer-reviewed data on how an algorithm affects your local labor market or your domestic security before you ban it or approve it.
But because of that speed discrepancy we just talked about, waiting for perfect peer-reviewed evidence means the technology has already reshaped your society by the time you publish your findings.
Which means you act too late. Policymakers are essentially being asked to regulate the chemical composition of rocket fuel.
While the rocket is already in orbit.
Exactly.
It sounds like trying to write traffic laws for flying cars while they're already zipping around your head.
That's a perfect analogy.
But how does a continent like Africa, which historically might have fewer resources to dedicate to rapidly shifting tech evaluation, keep up with this moving target? How do they avoid just being completely overwhelmed?
That is the defining challenge here. And it's exactly what CAISD's Strategic Action Plan is designed to address.
Okay.
Dr. Jingae's report lays out a very concrete roadmap for translating the high-level Geneva talks into tangible institutional readiness. You don't try to outpace the trillion-dollar tech giants on your own. You build up your internal immune system, so to speak.
One of her major proposals here is building an African AI governance maturity framework, drawing on resources like the Digital Cooperation Organization's guidebook.
Yeah. Think of this framework as a diagnostic MRI for a government's institutions.
Okay, an MRI.
It measures things like data governance, ethical oversight protocols, cybersecurity readiness, and workforce capability.
So let's walk through what that looks like in practice. Say a national health ministry wants to implement an AI diagnostic tool. What does failing this maturity assessment look like?
Well, a failure might look like a ministry realizing during the assessment that they have absolutely no localized data governance protocols in place.
Yikes.
Right. They might be ready to plug patient data into a foreign AI system, but the framework reveals they have no legal mechanism to prevent that foreign company from using their citizens' health data to train future commercial models.
So the framework forces institutions to see their blind spots before they sign the procurement contracts.
Exactly. It's preventative.
Which ties directly into her emphasis on African language and context-sensitive AI evaluation data sets.
Yes.
Crucial point.
If you don't have the data to test the AI in your local language, you can't even evaluate if it's hallucinating or giving biased advice to your citizens.
And building those data sets requires a massive, coordinated effort. Dr. Zingwa includes a stakeholder network matrix in her report, which is effectively a blueprint for how to build this ecosystem.
It's like a who's who of global tech infrastructure.
Yeah, she outlines strategic infrastructure partnerships with heavy hitters, like the UN Economic Commission for Africa, ITU, UNITAR, and UNU.
Let's clarify some of those acronyms for a second, because their inclusion is a really big deal.
Right. So UNITAR is the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Their involvement means we aren't just talking about abstract policy anymore.
Right.
They are literally building the curriculum to teach African government officials and technocrats how to audit an algorithm. And UNU, the United Nations University, brings the joint research capacity to actually create those African language evaluation datasets alongside local experts.
So it's about building the human capital required to oversee the technology.
Precisely.
Okay, so Dr. Xinhua is mapping out the blueprint for the rail network, to go back to our earlier metaphor. She's organizing the engineers, designing the stations. But here is where we hit a massive wall. Because principles and maturity frameworks and stakeholder matrices, they're vital. But what happens when these global diplomatic ideals hit the harsh physical realities of modern computing?
The transition from the diplomatic room to the server room is where the real power dynamics are exposed.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Our second source, the analytical article, drops a statistic from the Center for Strategic and International Studies that completely recontextualizes this entire conversation.
It's a staggering number.
Africa has roughly 18% of the global population, but it possesses less than 1% of the world's global data center capacity.
Let the mechanics of that just sink in for a second. 18% of humanity, and less than 1% of the actual compute power required to run the future of the internet.
To put that in perspective for you listening, if you are streaming this on a modern high-end smartphone, you are holding more localized compute power in your hand right now than some entire municipal governments have access to for their digital infrastructure.
It's terrifying. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the true AI divide isn't about who has the smartest coders or the best theoretical policy.
No.
It is about capital, and it is about physical infrastructure. A very small number of global technology firms control the compute layer.
The actual physical servers, the cooling systems, the advanced microchips.
Exactly, the stuff that makes artificial intelligence function.
The article uses a phrase for this: asymmetrical interdependence.
Which is just a polite academic way of saying the power dynamic is entirely rigged.
Right.
African nations and many others in the global south are deeply dependent on compute infrastructure owned by foreign monopolies.
But let's look at the mechanism of how that strips a country of its sovereignty. If I'm a policymaker in a country with near zero data centers and I pass a really strict AI governance law, how do I actually enforce that on a tech giant operating servers in Virginia or Dublin?
You don't. That's the harsh reality. You just can't.
Wow.
If all your citizens' data is being routed through foreign servers, subject to foreign data laws, and processed by foreign-owned algorithms, your local AI governance law is practically unenforceable.
It's just a piece of paper.
Literally, you cannot audit a black box algorithm if you don't control the hardware it runs on.
So the analysis source argues that the only way to gain that leverage is through regional coordination, teaming up.
Because a single developing nation simply doesn't have the tax base or the capital to build a multi-billion-dollar sovereign compute ecosystem from scratch.
It's too expensive.
Way too expensive. If you try to build isolated national data centers in every single country, the infrastructure is fragmented, the energy costs are unmanageable, and you still don't have enough processing power to train large models anyway.
So the solution is pooled infrastructure via mechanisms like the African Union, forming shared compute consortia to scale up capabilities and lower costs.
Exactly.
I have to push back on the feasibility of that, though. I mean, that sounds great in theory, but getting the African Union or any multinational body really to agree on a shared multi-billion-dollar sovereign data center ecosystem, the geopolitical friction there is massive. You're talking about negotiating cross-border data flows, deciding which country physically hosts the servers, who pays for the cooling, who gets priority access to the processing power. That is a diplomatic nightmare.
It absolutely is a diplomatic nightmare. But the analysis makes it clear that it is an existential necessity. The alternative to that geopolitical friction is permanent technological subservience.
Because without that back-end infrastructure and the local human capacity to manage it, your national policy is, like we said, just paper.
Right. And the analysis source shares a shocking, real-world cautionary tale that proves exactly what happens when policy is just a piece of paper without the human and physical infrastructure to back it up.
The South Africa hallucination incident?
Yeah.
This blew my mind. It is the perfect illustration of that evidence dilemma we discussed earlier. So in April 2026, South Africa gazetted a draft national AI policy. It went through the cabinet. It was published for public comment, a major milestone, right?
Supposed to be, yeah.
But then, just 2 months later in June, the government had to embarrassingly withdraw the entire draft.
Let's break down the mechanics of why it was withdrawn, because it's wild.
The reference list in this official national policy document contained completely fabricated citations. They were AI hallucinations.
Which tells us exactly what the mechanical failure in their workflow was. A drafter, likely trying to speed up the tedious process of literature review on AI regulations, used a large language model. The LLM hallucinates legal precedents and academic papers that just don't exist. And because the institution lacked the internal technical literacy, the human capital that we talked about building with Unitar, no senior official caught the error before it was published in the National Gazette.
Oh my gosh. It's the ultimate proof that institutional readiness isn't just a buzzword. It's not about having an AI policy to present at a UN summit. It's about having human beings who understand the technology well enough to check its homework.
You have to understand the tool to govern the tool. South Africa's mishap is a painful lesson, but it provides the exact roadmap for what the rest of the continent needs to do before the UN holds its follow-up dialogue in New York in May 2027.
Right, because the clock is ticking.
The co-chairs in Geneva made it crystal clear. New York is about tangible improvements and implemented actions, not new statements of intent.
So, synthesizing everything from the CAISD report and the compute analysis, a logical progression really emerges for these governments. There are 4 vital steps here. The South Africa failure shows us that the absolute first step is treating evidence infrastructure as a core governance priority. You must build the technical capacity to verify claims before they enter policy.
Step 1. But to run those local evaluation tools and to power those domestic researchers, you need processing power. Which forces the second step, pursuing that compute strategy regionally.
Rather than nationally.
Right. You pool resources through the African Union to build the data centers that give your human researchers the computing leverage they actually need.
And once you have the humans and the servers, you have to write the actual rules, which brings in the third step, the interoperability challenge.
Yes.
Whether a country adopts, say, South Africa's sector-based model where existing regulators handle AI in their specific fields, like the Health Board regulating health AI or Kenya's broader risk-based approach, the domestic frameworks have to connect seamlessly with emerging global norms.
To use your earlier metaphor, you are building train tracks.
Hi.
If your local regulatory tracks don't match the width of the neighboring country's tracks or the international standards on human rights and data sharing, the global digital economy will simply bypass you.
Wow.
You cannot retrofit international interoperability. It has to be designed into your local laws from day one.
And then the fourth step is just showing up to New York in 2027 with all of this actually implemented, not just talked about.
Exactly. Implemented actions.
So what does this all mean? If you're listening right now, whether you are prepping for a boardroom meeting on emerging tech, analyzing international markets, or you're just a curious citizen trying to understand the geopolitical tectonic plates shifting under our feet, the lesson here is profound.
It really is.
Effective governance of this new era isn't just a legal exercise in drafting clever regulations. It requires a massive fusion of physical reality and meticulous oversight.
It demands the heavy metal of regional data centers, combined with the sharp, highly trained minds of local researchers who, won't let a hallucination slip into a national gazette.
The countries that will thrive aren't necessarily just the ones inventing the fastest algorithms. They're the ones intelligently pooling their resources to build a sovereign foundation that actually allows them to enforce their own laws. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I know you always look for the hidden currents in these topics. What is the final provocative thought you want to leave the listener with today?
This raises an important question, and it's something for you to mull over. We've established that meaningful AI governance and the sheer compute power required to sustain it practically demands pooled regional infrastructure for developing nations.
Right, they have to pool it.
You simply have to work together to survive the massive capital requirements of the AI divide. So, could artificial intelligence, with all its risks and its staggering infrastructure demands, be the unexpected catalyst that finally forces deep, unified political and economic integration across whole continents?
Oh, wow.
Could the sheer survival necessity of building shared, cross-border data centers achieve a level of continental unity that decades of traditional diplomacy and trade agreements never could?
So, to build the tracks for this runaway train, the sheer cost might finally force us to act as one unified global station.
Exactly.
That is a fascinating thought. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.